The situation is pretty critical, in my view. The powers that be have, rolled up the wagons in a circle, and the National Defense Authorization Act is, I think, probably the most revealing thing. This is the one that allows somebody from, what is it called now, McCord, Lewis McCord, come in here and take Mcgovern to an undisclosed location without charge or anything, but not forever, just until there are no more terrorists, That reversed history since the Civil War, when Southern whites were using the U.S. Army to bring in slavery again, or Reconstruction, whatever they called it. And now they can use the U.S. Army to do this. Now, why did they do that? Why do you think they wanted to make a law that stringent to use the Army against us, or use the Army? What were they afraid of? Now, bear in mind, this was 2 years ago, right? What was going on? Pardon? Occupy, you got it, yeah. Yeah, it seemed to me, I was interviewed about this right after it happened. I'm sitting in this anteroom and saying, now, what's changed over the last several months? And the only thing I could think of was Occupy. And I said, they're afraid of us. Up till then we had thousands, but suppose there were tens of thousands. Suppose there were 100,000 surrounding the Congress and the White House, and they couldn't get home to their cocktails and martinis in Georgetown, Who are they going to call? They'll call the park police. Right, the park police were on our side, They let us camp out there, right in the middle of Washington, not the car. How about, the Capitol Police? Well, the Capitol Police, with all due respect, they're good at operating those things that you have to walk through to make sure you don't have a weapon on you, but not so much else. District Police. Well, district police are increasingly aware that they are part of the 99%, okay? And small wonder that they realize that. So suppose something really happens, suppose the flag goes up, suppose we are surrounded, who can we call on? U.S. Army. The generals, such as there are predominantly creatures of the system. They'll do whatever advances their profile and career. I hate to say that, but it's true. And the people who populate the so-called volunteer army, it's a poverty draft, folks. And there's a shame on our country. These are mostly people from towns in this country of less than 50,000 people and from the inner city. These are people who have no prospect of a job or of a good education. It's a poverty draft. And they've been ingrained to do what they're told. Witness that terrible WikiLeaks collateral damage or collateral murder thing. I showed that earlier today, and every time I see it, it turns my stomach, because it's not only the Iraqis who are being brutalized, it's been the fellows in those helicopters as well, brutalized. So what are we going to do? Well, I found that in talking around the country, that Americans have a peculiar hesitancy, okay? Now, it's understandable. Who likes to be laughed at, I mean, we don't like to start something that doesn't have a reasonable prospect of success, right? I mean, like, who wants to hear, Mcgovern, what did you think you were doing, turning your back, standing up there when Hillary Clinton was speaking? What was that all about? Well, so you got beat up. Was it, well, I don't know why I did it, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And, we're not supposed to be worried about being successful. We're supposed to be what? Faithful, The good is worth doing because it's good. And if we're all worried about, whether we're going to achieve success, we ain't going to do nothing. It's much, it's like what Camus said, you can always remain silent, and that's, of course, what the Germans did in the 30s. So the other thing, when I got beat up by the goons at Hillary Clinton, this was at George Washington University, that folks that don't know, about 3 years ago. All I did was, well, maybe I just explain in my own defense. I spent not a lot of time, but I spent some time in the Soviet Union, and there used to be, when a Soviet leader made a speech, there would be stormy applause, and in Pravda the next day, it would be, every third paragraph would say, "Бурные аплодисменты, все стоят." Stormy applause, everyone stands, right? Well, Hillary Clinton walks into this lecture hall, not lecture hall, this big auditorium at GW University. I got somebody to get me an invitation to it. And stormy applause, everyone stands, okay? I'm thinking, oh, бурные аплодисменты, все стоят. And then the president of George Washington University comes in. I'll tell you, he made her out to be, you know, Mother Teresa, okay? And so I'm holding my nose there and I say, McGovern, what are you going to do? Luckily, I had my Veterans for Peace shirt on. So there was plenty of time. They stood for about 4 minutes, so I took off my outer shirt and I put my Veterans for Peace shirt on. I turned my back and I just stood. And all she could see, and she was as close as that camera there, all she could see was veteransforpeace.org, you know? But what the cameras could see was me standing there, you know, as she's talking right behind me, and they could see Veterans for Peace, the whole logo here, okay? And I said, you know, I've done this before actually in church. I'm a Catholic and I don't like the fact that women are subordinated, and I couldn't just sit where I used to sit and kneel and whatever, you know. So I used to stand for the service. I did that for 4.5 years in my parish. I finally had to leave. But anyhow, so I'm fixed, you know, I did what I did then at Holy Trinity. I looked right at the wall and I picked up a little piece on the wall, and 2 minutes, man, everything's, you know, this is going to work. This will be good. And the cameras, you know, get me, you know. And I hear Hillary Clinton talking about the necessity to have freedom of expression. It's really important, you know, in Iran, you know. And she doesn't miss a syllable. She just keeps going on. Then all of a sudden I see this guy come down with, he looked like a Redskins reject, you know. He looked about 300 pounds. He comes down with just a suit on. And he's coming down to me and I said, oh, I don't know what's going to happen now. Before I could figure out what happened, some guy grabs me from the back. They lift me up, and they carry me over the 3 women between me and the aisle, take me out, bang my head against the door frame on the way out, and did other brutal things. Meanwhile, Hillary doesn't miss a beat, okay? Not a syllable. And it's all recorded, you know, it's kind of interesting. Some of the footage did get out. Now, why do I say this? Well, I say this because I see some people around here that have the same color hair I do. And when that happened to me, the first report came out of Fox News. And it was pretty, you know, so-so. It said, an elderly gentleman. That hurt, you know. An elderly gentleman was thought to have a sign secreted beneath the seat, or it was felt that he might be willing to shout something out at the Secretary of State, and so he was escorted out of the theater. Right? Okay, so right, escorted out of the theater. Right. But when the word got out that when the pictures came out, what happened to me, I mean, people care about old people getting beat up, and that's why I mentioned in this. You know, young people, I have it coming. You know, young people, I can take it. But 71-year-old people, you know, I'm even older now, if you can believe it, you know, we have an advantage. And I say this not jocularly. I say this in real seriousness. We have an advantage. People care if we get beat up. And I don't think they're going to kill us. But if you're willing to take a stand on these things, you're going to get a lot more reaction, a lot more resonance by virtue of you being an old guy like me. And when one of my Veterans for Peace added, yeah, and he's got cancer. Luckily, I had, you know, just gotten into remission. But, oh man, Hillary Clinton had over 500,000 emails and telephone calls just by virtue of the 71 years old. The cancer brought it up to 800,000. So, you know, I kid you not. We can kind of, you know, have our principles, okay? And we can stand on our principles. But if there is nothing for which you're willing to suffer for those principles, and I don't mean necessarily physically, but, you know, if you're not willing to put those principles into play where you could get hurt, where your compassion would mean, you know, actually suffering with or suffering because look what Ed Stone did. Then your principles, they're really nice to have, aren't they? But I don't know, there's something lacking there, it seems to me. The prospect of success, I think we've dealt with that. Are there enough of us? Cesar Chavez used to always say, there are enough of us. But without action, nothing's going to happen. Op-eds are really nice, speeches are really nice, but if you don't get out there, nothing's going to happen. And it's getting kind of late. And I think that probably the next year or two are going to be key. And so I think we need to play a role. We have to recognize our responsibility. We have to be prophetic. We have to go back to the vision of the founders. I've learned a little bit about the prophets at this place where I work, at the Ecumenical Church of the Savior. And I just want to see how biblically literate that this crowd is. Okay, Isaiah. Who knows that Isaiah walked around for at least 2 years stark naked? Raise your hand. Whoa. Oh, good. All right, there are a couple people here. All right. Now, it's right in the Bible, okay? Now, the question is, what was he doing, Now, the smart exegetes, the people who study really hard, said, well, it's not clear, and they say this without any humor, Usually exegetes don't have a lot of humor, and they say, well, it's not clear that he was always naked, just during liturgical services. That may be good exegesis, but it doesn't get the man off the hook, right? So what was he saying? What I think he was saying is, look, I'm stripped of my garments here, right? And you say, oh, isn't that awful? Isn't that awful? You are stripped of the vision with which Yahweh blessed you, a vision of justice and shalom, and that is far worse than being physically naked. I don't think we're stripped of that vision, but I think it's kind of needs repair and needs some courage, and needs it quickly. Martin Luther King famously said, there is such a thing as too late. There is such a thing as too late. And I'll finish just by quoting a German that you may not have heard of. He was a contemporary of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran minister who tried to waken up the church there and couldn't. His name was Albrecht Haushofer, and he was a Geolog. He was a geologist at the University of Berlin, and he had tenure. And some of you may not know what tenure means, but it means a lot, It meant a lot in Berlin, and it means a lot around here now. I don't have to tell some of you. Now, how did he get tenure? By keeping his mouth shut. So, he also had a conscience. And as he watched his Jewish friends and other friends being wrapped up, sent away, he gathered a following around himself and spoke out against what was going on, okay? And it was really quite significant that they saw this fellow finally speaking out. And so he was wrapped up by the Gestapo and put in another prison, separate from Bonhoeffer, and he was condemned to be shot. Bonhoeffer was hanged. Those were the two executions that they used. But the Germans, being very meticulous, they insisted that you sign a confession before they would shoot you or hang you, okay? Now, Haushofer, it wasn't about to do that, So he refused to do it, and as the Allies approached, they shot him and fell down. And as they picked him up, out of his pocket fell a little settle, little piece of paper, And on it, the title was Schuld. Guilt, right, okay? And it was his confession. And it was written in the form of a sonnet. And how many have German here? Yeah, okay, good, some have. Okay, well, it's not very long, but what it said was, Schuld. Doch bin ich schuldig, aber anders als ihr denkt. Yeah, I'm guilty, but it's not what you're thinking, right? Ich musste früher meine Pflicht erkennen. I should have früher, earlier, recognized my duty. Ich musste schärfer Unheil, Unheil nennen. I should have schärfer, more sharply called Unheil. evil. Mein Urteil habe ich zu lang gelenkt. I put off my judgment far too long. Ich habe gewarnt, I did warn, and it's, you know, we know he did warn, aber nicht genug. Enough. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug und klar, clear, claro. There's no comparative in German for klar. Klar is klar. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. And today I recognize what I was guilty of. So, there is such a thing as too late. A lot of you recognize that and are out there doing your thing already, but we need all of us in this battle, and we need to be able to stick our necks out. So, I don't have to tell most of you this, but I'll say it anyway. Be willing to stick your necks out. Be willing to do whatever is necessary to demonstrate that we want to be loyal to our founders' vision. And if we have to strip ourselves naked, well, that's one thing, but we probably won't have to do that. Whatever we need to do, we do it without worrying about whether it's going to be successful or not. But let's just try to do the good because it's worth doing, and leave the rest in other hands, in the hands of the coming generation. And I know that I can be with my 9 grandchildren in a much more comfortable way if I know that I'm doing what I can to make their future a little better. So thanks very much for listening, and I hope that we can just kind of chat. Thanks.
I'm just wondering what a president gets every morning in terms of a security statement, and what impact you imagine that has on a president coming in as a community organizer from Chicago.
Well, it depends on the president and his experience or lack thereof, but I can speak to my own experience, and it was the heyday of that kind of briefing, because when Ronald Reagan was elected to be president, we went right out to Pacific Palisades with the president's daily brief, with the approval of Admiral Turner, our director, and Jimmy Carter, our president, and gave him the same treatment that we gave Carter and well, the Carter White House, with one difference. Since Brzezinski knew all the answers, just like Kissinger before him, we never set foot in the White House to say hello to the president or brief him personally. They all took the PDB and marked it up and said, "Don't worry about this one. We just went to, this is foolish," and all that kind of stuff. But with Reagan, we got a foot in the door right off the bat. We showed up, 2 of us. It wasn't me, but 2 colleagues. And they said, PDB, her President's Daily Brief, and the Secret Service said, what are you talking about? We don't know about it. You haven't been heard? You haven't heard about that? Well, just then, fortuitously, Ronald Reagan comes down the stairs with his bathrobe on. So what's going on here? PDB, CIA briefing, sir. Oh, come on in. So that's how it happened. And he liked the treatment 6 mornings a week. There was one guy out there for 2 weeks, the next one come out the next 2 weeks. And by the time he came to Washington, it was judged to be a real success, and he really liked it. So George H.W. Bush, his vice president, said, well, okay, now, Mr. President, how do you want to set it up now? I think that I should get one-on-one treatment too, as vice president, and maybe the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, but let's keep it to that because these are, very delicate, very sensitive things. And Reagan said, that's a good idea, except I think it's kind of early for me, and so why don't you all get the one-on-one, and come see me about 11:30 and tell me what you should worry about. So the good news was we went one-on-one with the very top national security people in the whole government every morning, 6 days a week, okay? Sort of not so good news was that we very seldom got to see the president personally, but giving those people these briefings and having them being able to compare notes with one another, it saved the president an awful lot of back and forth, so they kind of knew what each one had been told, and they were able to brief the president at 11:30 in a much more efficient way. So it was the heyday of it, and it was one-on-one. Senior analysts were respected enough and trusted enough to do that. And there were times when I knew that my superiors were lying about whether the Communist Party of the Soviet Union would ever collapse, whether Gorbachev was the real deal. And I knew the trustworthy people who had been through Soviet analysis with me. And when we saw Gorbachev, we realized he was the real deal. And so in briefing Secretary Shultz, I told him what the people I trust felt about it, which put me at odds with Bill Casey, the director, and Bobby Gates, who once worked for me as a young analyst, who was the head of the CIA, or head of analysis at the time. So it was, you know, that was irregular. It shouldn't have been necessary, but it was possible to speak truth to power one-on-one. Now, what did George W. Bush do? As soon as he heard that briefers were going down, not George W. Bush, but George Tenet, when briefers go down early in the morning for FaceTime with the president, he hitched a ride. Can I come with you? And the briefer should have said, no, sir, thanks very much, but we don't need the director looking over our shoulder. Of course, nobody said that. So, put yourself in that position. President George W. Bush says, all right, tell us about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, honest analyst, it's a crock, Mr. President, it's a crock. It's a neocon fable. We destroyed all of them after the first war. We don't think there are any left, and they're certainly not working on any nuclear weapon. Yeah. Well, he's going to say that with George Tenet, the fawning sycophant, standing right behind him. Well, I think I would have said it anyway, but I wouldn't be briefing the next day. So it's sort of a trade-off. So even that got corrupted because, you know, when the party line is this, and you know the truth is that, there's some difficult choices to make. And I dare say most people kind of bend with the wind. I'm sorry to be so long-winded. Please, next question.
Just have two quick questions.
Sure.
It just came out that Arafat was found to have his body have polonium in it.
Polonium.
I'd like to know, who do you suspect was the one? Was it our government or some other government?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were with the Johnson administration in August of 1967.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us anything about the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty that you're familiar with? And
Sure,
why Congress has refused to bring that case to an investigation before these guys die?
Okay. Sure. I don't know. It's sort of a no-brainer. The usual suspect would be Israel. They have the capability, and you know, the circumstances clearly point in that direction. He got sick there when he was in Ramallah, and we kind of know. It's no surprise to me that those were the results. They're not final yet, I understand, but it's, you know, and whether George Bush knew about it or not, probably not, but the Israelis rightly would have judged that George Bush would be very happy to get rid of Arafat. Now, the USS Liberty, let me just ask, how many people know about the USS Liberty incident? Oh, thank God, thank God. When Mearsheimer and Waltz finally got their piece out, they had to go to London, to the London Review of Books. That was the first place that it appeared. They had a contract with the Atlantic to publish it, but when the Atlantic saw the draft, they said, oh gosh, you know, we can't publish something. This would get us in trouble with the AIPAC, with the Israel lobby. So anyhow, after they published that, I was on a plane going to Missouri. And so I read it, and man, I thought it was great, you know? And I get off the plane, and I'm speaking in this church hall about this size, but it was full, about 300 people. And after it was, well, yeah, toward the end, somebody said, well, what did you think of Mearsheimer and Walt's book or article? And I said, yeah, thanks for asking. I have just read it. I think it's great, but I have one big question. And so what's that? I said, well, the whole thrust of the book is to show the influence of the Israel lobby, and they're right on about that. But why did they not include the best example that Israel can get away literally with murder, murdering our naval officers, and get away with that? And I've since asked, which one was it? Mearsheimer, I guess. He said, well, we didn't want to lay it on too thick. You know, well, hello. So then I looked out at this audience, and that's what, sorry to be so long-worded, but I said, how many people know? Well, so what happened was, yeah, so I answered that. I said, you know, I just couldn't understand why they didn't use the USS Liberty incident. And then I looked at these blank faces. And I said, now, how many of you have heard about the USS Liberty, what happened to it on June 8th, 1967? 3 hands, one here, one in the middle, one in the back. And so I picked the guy nearest. I said, sir, can you tell us how you know about that? Yes. Bryce Lockwood, U.S. Marine Corps, member of the USS Liberty crew. Yeah, this is in Springfield, Missouri. I said, Mr. Lockwood, could you come up here and share what happened? He said, sir, I've not been able to do that, but I think I'd like to try tonight. Yeah. And he came up and he gave 10 minutes of rendition of what it was like, what he went through. He was the commanding Marine of all the Marines who are working on the intercept material, and it fell to him to dig out the bodies from where the torpedo came in. So that sensitized me to the problem here. Nobody knows about the USS Liberty, and so when I talked up in Maine earlier this year, I asked the same question, and it was an audience much like this, but only about 5 of maybe 200 raised their hands. So it's good that you guys know about it, and isn't it proof positive that the Israelis think they can get away with murder and have, and our Congress, and you know, when they finally decided to give the commander of that ship the Medal of Honor, you know what, the State Department asked the Israeli ambassador, you wouldn't take offense if we give him, would you believe it? You won't take offense if well, we prefer you not, but, so they did it not in the White House, but in the Navy Yard on the Anacostia River where you have to hold your nose before you go there. So that's how bad it was, okay? And I've been with the USS Liberty crew, the ones that survived, obviously, and I had the incredible experience of honoring a guy named Terry Harbardier, who is a young Texan, 19 at the time, seaman, who volunteered to go across the napalm-strewn deck and try to connect a wire with an antenna that hadn't been used. It hadn't been used, and so the Israelis didn't know it was there. They destroyed all the other antennae right away. And the captain said, well, this is pretty dangerous. He said, yeah, I want to do it. I can do that. I can do lots of stuff with bail and wire, you know? Well, he did, and they got an SOS out, okay? The Israelis intercepted the SOS. They broke off the attack as soon as they realized that the USS American, USS Saratoga were sending fighter bombers to deal with whoever was attacking a U.S. Navy ship. And what happened then? That's right.
Yes. He said he didn't give a damn if the ship sank,
Yeah.
but he wouldn't embarrass our ally.
Yeah. So you guys know the story. What happened was the commander of the Sixth Fleet? Yeah, Sixth Fleet. He got this telephone call, break off the attack. Who's this? Secretary McNamara. And to his credit, he said, well, you know, my forces are under attack. I'm going to have to speak to your supervisor. You know, some of these Navy guys have some guts, you know. Lyndon Johnson's on the other line. He says, I want you to call those folks back. You call them right away. We don't want to embarrass our ally. Admiral guy saluted, called them back. But luckily, the Israelis had gotten the message that they were coming, and they got out of Dodge. The ship limped back to Malta under its own power, and let's see, how many people were killed? 37, 34, and 171 wounded, okay? And those people, you want to talk about PTSD? I'll tell you what PTSD looks like. They were told not to talk to their wives, to their children, to their fellow crew people about it ever, under pain of court-martial, okay? And sharing, Terry Halbardier got a medal from a congressman in the Central Valley of California. I went out to that ceremony. It was so wonderful to get that recognition, okay? This is the guy that connected the cable, guy from Texas, okay? Now, I had lunch with those guys, and they told me what it was like. And you want to see PTSD like in spades, you put people in that kind of position where they can't even acknowledge what happened to them. People dug out the bodies from where the torpedo went in. And so, you know, that's a concrete example, and people need to know that, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Sorry to be so long-winded, but for those who you hadn't had the story, there's a website, isn't there, ussliberty.org or something like that? You can learn a lot about it. It's not a happy story, but it's one that we have to know. Now, I have to say that the president faced down Israeli pressure to do to Syria what we did to Iraq. And so there are glimmers of hope here that the lobby doesn't reign completely supreme. The right thing happened. You know, peace broke out on Syria. And just look at the people who are in high dudgeon because peace broke out, and you'll see the real neocons and the people that really wanted this Sunni Shia thing to continue indefinitely, because who profits from that? Israel. And not only in Syria, but you know, Sunni Shia throughout that whole area. So, so there is progress, and I'm happy to say that, but we've got a really long way to go. So, but you know, I'll say a word about Rachel Corrie. You know, I've met Craig and Cindy many years ago, like 8 or 9 years ago, and we were having this long brunch. It was great down in Olympia, and I saw that Craig had on a bracelet, and he saw that I had one on. It was orange, and he said, "What's that, Ray?" I said, "Well, that's about torture. We're wearing that in Washington now, you know, orange torture." I said, "What's that green one?" He said, "Well, that's." He didn't say anything. He took it off, and he said, "Read it." And it says, "Rachel Corrie, April 10, 1979, March 16, 2003. He says, "Would you like it?" I said, "Well, yes, of course I would. Do you have others?" He said, "Yeah, we have others." I've been wearing that since. Now, I've gone through about 5 of them, you know. And last time he was in Washington just 3 weeks ago, he brought me like 10 of them that will last me the next, hopefully, 10 years. I had been wearing one that was stapled together for a whole year. I was able to take a shower with it. Don't worry about that. But so anyhow, this, you know, I look at this and I say, well, you know, there's one of those prophets. There's one of those people who wasn't worried about whether she'd be successful. You know, there's a real gutsy young lady that if I have a reminder about what she did, well, you know, getting beat up by the GW police or whoever it was, you know, that's not as bad as getting run over by an Israeli tank, right? And then getting backed over just to make sure your back is broken. So, you know, there are these little, artifacts or something that are useful to me to remind me that, you know, there are pretty courageous people around still today. You don't have to be a saint from the Middle Ages. And so the Corries are special to me, and I'm going to see them just tomorrow. I'm going to be talking down Evergreen and doing a thing in Olympia as well. Sorry.
I grew up in Monterey, California, when Leon Panetta ran for Congress. Several of the most prominent Republican lawyers in town announced their support of him, and the county chairman of the Republican Party criticized them. And they said, "Oh, you don't understand. This isn't Democrats and Republicans. This is Leon. He's smarter than all of us, and he works harder than all of us, and he's more honest than anyone we've ever met." So Leon was the same in Congress, smarter and harder working and more honest. And then in the CIA and at the Pentagon, he looked an awful lot like just another government bureaucrat. I think that means that's final proof that nobody and nothing can stand up against the machine, and that if we want to make changes, it doesn't matter so much who we put in, it matters how we change America's culture so that it will no longer support such a machine. Your comments?
Well, that's a profound observation. All I can say is that I've been wrong several times over the last 12 years when I've been doing this, but never wronger than when I diagnosed Leon Panetta as a guy who was going to save the intelligence apparatus. I mean, look, he was trained by Jesuits, Santa Clara Law School. He must have this ethos of telling the truth. He must, he criticized torture a year before he was named, Never have I been wronger. What did he become? He became the agency's lawyer. He left the torturers, the kidnappers, the secret wardens at these prisons in place, awarded them stuff, and he acted as the interface between them and Congress, defending them at every turn. And in the process, when he became Secretary of Defense, he was a traitor to the Constitution of the United States. Why do I say that? Well, that senator from Alabama, what's his name? He's on a Judiciary Committee. He's a lawyer, and he was asking Panetta, now you didn't so much as tell us about Libya. You thought that you could just make a war on your own. Don't you know that Congress is given the power to declare war or to authorize war in the first article of the Constitution? Panetta, the president's going to do what's necessary to defend our country, period. Yes, but doesn't it need to be authorized or at least discussed with the Congress? The president has every right to do what he has to do to defend our country, and he's going to do it. Is that clear? Now, who's sitting next to him but General Dempsey? Now, General Dempsey is the real deal. He knows what the Constitution says, and it was largely Dempsey who prevented war with Syria. And I'll just say a quick word about that because it's really necessary for people to understand. It's not just conjecture. On Friday afternoon, August 30, John Kerry got up and said 35 times, we know Bashar al-Assad has leveled those chemical attacks and blah, 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 blah. And the president said that was the red line. We know, blah, blah. Everyone thought, including me, that when the president got up in the Rose Garden the next afternoon, he would say, even as we speak, cruise missiles are flying into, blah, 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 What happened? What changed his mind? The Israelis had already been warned that we were going to attack with the cruise missiles, because they had to be warned. They want to put up their own defenses. And we know that because the Israelis have admitted that. So what happened? Well, the clue is in what the president said in the Rose Garden. What did he say? Do you remember? He said, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has told me that there's no time sensitivity to this operation. Our forces are in place, but we can do it today, we can do it tomorrow, we could do it next week, we could do it next month. So I'm going to seek authorization from the Congress. Whoa. That's not the way things was going down. Now, he said that, and then the next day, if more proof were needed, John McCain and Lindsey Graham descend on the White House, you remember? In high dudgeon, and they're railing, they come out into the little driveway there, and the press says, well, what's going on? Well, that chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has put the kibosh on this whole thing. We had, how are we going to defend, blah, 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 blah. So, finally, the way I diagnose it, and you can take it for what it's worth, Dempsey went to the president and said, look, Mr. President, we know that you really like those young, tough guys in the White House who never served, and those new tough young gals you got there, they're really great people. What Samantha so-and-so and Susan Rice, we know that you like those guys, but they don't know diddly about war. And neither does John Kerry, with all due respect. Running boats up against up at the Mekong doesn't qualify you to talk about the possibility of a unbelievably small strike against Syria, which will have no consequences. And we, so, Mr. President, we know about war. And I just want to tell you that when the press comes, as they inevitably will, and say, General Dempsey, why did you have to do that now? Why couldn't you have waited till the UN inspectors come back and report? I'm going to have to say, beats the hell out of me, go ask the president. Now, why do I think Dempsey was capable of that? Well, because when our president was too afraid of the Israel lobby to tell Netanyahu this time last year not to provoke the Iranians into some sort of hostilities before the election. Remember, there was an election last year, okay? He sent Panetta, and he sent Hillary Clinton, and he sent his national security advisor, and he sent the chairman. He sent everybody there to tell, to ask Bibi Netanyahu, please, pretty please, not before the election. After the election, we'll talk about it some more, but not before the election, okay? And what did Netanyahu do? We have this sign in the Bronx, something maybe. So I was deathly afraid that that Netanyahu would do it unless the president himself spoke out publicly. He didn't. Who spoke out? Anybody remember? Dempsey, right? Yeah. In London on the 30th of August. Interesting that it was also the 30th of August. Dempsey speaks out and he says this, quote, "I don't want to be complicit if the Israelis attack Iran," end quote. Oh! Now, did he have the president's permission to say that? I'm sure he did. I mean, even chairman of the Joint Chiefs don't go off on their own tangent. But what he said to Obama was, look, somebody's got to say it. I realize you got political problems. You got the lobby to contend. I don't, but the stakes are very high, Mr. President. This is what I'm going to say in London, okay? And he said, okay. So that's the kind of Dempsey we have. You know, he's atypical in terms of a general that's, you know, the generals get to be generals because other generals think they're safe and, you know, they get promoted in a pretty corrupt way. But Dempsey is the real deal. And so that's a real hope on the horizon here, because I think he was at least, well, I think he was usually responsible for changing the president's mind. And, you know, peace broke out for once. You know, there are times when we can rejoice about these things. I had real trouble persuading my colleagues and veteran intelligence professionals of Sanity, hey, we won this one, you know? Peace has broken out. Well, yeah, but, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's rejoice when we have small victories. They come few and far between. This was a biggie.
The NSA has a cozy relationship with the subcontractors. And also, Snowden pointed out that we share raw intelligence with the Israelis. And so I was thinking that maybe the Israelis would get information on our politicians and use that information to blackmail them in the future. And we'll even give the Israeli lobby even more power.
Yeah, this has come out. It's even come out that the raw intelligence has been shared with the Israelis. And that means us, you know, the Israelis have information on us. So, yeah, that's a real worry. And, you know, there are a lot of things like that in this relationship.
Do you think there's going to be a false flag attack after Assad gets his weapons removed?
Well, it's hard to know. It's a can of worms what's going to happen in Syria. But what I do know is that there's more hope now that with the Russians and us talking together, you know, we worked out this agreement. Putin deserves Kerry deserves no credit. Apparently Obama had to go behind Kerry's back and work this thing out with Putin. Look what Kerry said there in London, coming back. You know, he did his press conference, and then some correspondent came up and asked an unscheduled question. Is there nothing Assad can do to avoid getting attacked by you? And you remember Kerry's response? Well, I suppose he could destroy all his nuclear weapons, but that ain't going to happen. That will never happen, you know, okay? Well, his press his press spokesman. Just 1 hour later, she says, well, that was just a rhetorical flourish, you know. Well, I mean, I think you have to take some things at their face value. He didn't want that, and he didn't do his job in trying to figure that out with Lavrov, okay? But the president did, meeting with Putin twice in Belfast and also in St. Petersburg. And so it was just, you know, a terrible, inconvenient remark by Kerry to be so out of sync with what was really going on, because as you know, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, immediately said, well, we can do that, we can work that out. And then 2 hours later, the Syrian foreign minister said, we can destroy all those weapons, you know. And so they threw a lifeline to Obama, and to his credit, you know, he's under a lot of pressure not to take that kind of lifeline. He took it, and so peace broke out. Rejoice, and again I say, rejoice. You know.
The second question was, what do you think was the motivation behind the Liberty attack?
Well, you know, no one knows for sure, and that's what the most important thing here is, that the fact is very clear. Nobody disputes the fact. The Israelis did it, and they did it deliberately. We have the intercepted messages, but there's an American flag on that ship. Hit it. Follow your instructions, okay? So they did it deliberately. Now, why? That's not so clear, okay? Or the Israelis thinking that they could pretend that was an Egyptian or a Soviet thing and try to get us involved more directly in the war. More likely, the Israelis wanted to go up on the Golan the next day, and we had told them, no, now you did a really good job destroying the Egyptian and Syrian, don't go up on the Golan. We say again, don't go up on the Golan. Well, they had no way of going up on the Golan without communicating with their forces, and there was no way that the Liberty wouldn't pick up those communications. So that's one theory. It makes some sense to me that they didn't want to, you know, they don't like to ask permission. They would rather ask forgiveness. They were going up the Golan. They didn't want the president or any boss saying, don't do it. And so they could do that if they destroyed the Liberty. What was the other explanation? Yeah, getting the Russians and the Americans together at loggerheads, just getting the U.S. more deeply involved. It might have been a combination of all those things, but again, the important thing is it happened, it was deliberate, and you know, this combination of explanations is probably closest to the truth. Please.
Okay, the other 9/11, 1973, masterminded by Kissinger, a man who probably his favorite word is linkage. And he also, his big bloody hand was involved in East Timor, as you also know, and also Bangladesh. And I think by common sense definitions, he can be called a serial mass murderer and therefore a psychopath. My question, and he's also regarded as a sage, so my question is, naive as it is, what is it that protects him?
That's a really good question. It's the establishment. You know, he's anointed as some sort of sage, as you say, by the establishment. The establishment controls the press. And so here's Henry Kissinger giving out awards and getting awards still for being a mass murderer. You're right. So that just points up how I haven't said this yet tonight, but I always try to say it, that 50 years in Washington allows you to see a lot of change, right? Well, there's one change that dwarfs all the other changes in significance, and that is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media. That's big, folks. The Fourth Estate is dead, okay? The good news, what's the good news? Yeah, there's a Fifth Estate. A Fifth Estate, I don't know where it is, but it comes down into my computer, right? And there's Julian Assange, and there's lots of stuff available. Then all you need to know is maybe 2 or 3 strokes to get onto a reputable website, and you can be better informed and more quickly informed than ever before.
Citizens are being warred upon, and the only way we can protect ourselves is to really, after this session, go home and research what you can, because it's the only way you can save each other.
Yeah, we have sort of in our church an ethos which is a little different, and that is you create a little group, like 3, 4, 5, 6 at the top. You know, a really little group, people that look at the world like you do, you feel simpatico with, and you meet every week, okay, every week, okay? And you will be amazed at what that synergy produces. There will be ideas that rise out of that synergy that none of you, not one of you, would have thought of by yourself. And when one of those ideas comes out, and it's kind of given, oh yeah, why did we think of that before? Yeah, we'll support you on that. Then you have the support of a small community, and then you have something called accountability, okay? Because if you say, I'm going to see my congressman on Thursday, you know that the next meeting, your friends will say, well, how'd that go, you know? And so there's both. There's the support in a small community, and there's the accountability that comes of being close to it. And that only comes when you meet every week and when you have a real trust. The only requirement is that there has to be at least one woman in these circles, because I find out that the women in this country have all the guts. Look at Code Pink, look at Rachel Corrie, look at the raging grannies up there in New York. Where are the raging grandpas? That's what I'd like to know, you know? I talked to the raging, they asked me to talk to them in New York, and I asked that question at the end. I said, anybody wants to be a raging grandpa, I'm willing to join that. And how many people came up? One.
I'm very curious about 9/11.
Oh, well, 9/11 is, you know, the most important thing to happen in the last generation. So, you know, it's a good thing to raise it. And I don't shy away from telling you where I stand on that. The official explanation is a whole bunch of lies. Now, you don't have to believe me on that. The guys that ran the commission, Hamilton and Kane, you know, up there in Jersey, distinguished governor of New Jersey previous. I mean, they were completely out of their depth. I remember when Kane was nominated to be the chair, and they said, well, now, how are you going to do your business of being president of your university, Drew University in New Jersey, and do this job? Oh, no problem. I'll come down once a week, and I'll, that's what he said, you know. And he found out later that, you know, it took 3 hours to get through security, you know, and to get access to this information. Then he wasn't allowed to take any notes, and then, you know, he had to take the metro liner back up to Princeton so to get back to, hello, that's, you know, that's how lightly he took his task. And he just sort of complained, you know, they're really not letting me see much stuff, but what he should have done, and what he could have done, is say, look, I want 3 security officers detailed to me in my study at Drew University. I want a safe. I want to keep all that stuff there. I want to be able to review it in the evening, and before I come down to Washington, I want this rigmarole and all that stuff. He didn't do that. Why didn't he do it? Because he's an establishment guy, right? And Hamilton, that faux Democrat who's been covering up everything since Iran-Contra, you know. So that was a big lie, that report, okay? And Hamilton and Kane have both said we were not given enough people, enough money, enough time. We were not given enough access to sensitive information, and so we were set up to fail. That's not me saying that. That's Kane and Hamilton saying that in their book, okay? So, and one might ask, you know, well, why didn't you tell us that when it was happening? But, you know, even if they did, probably wouldn't be in the major media. So, what are the facts? I've not been able to look into it as closely as possible, but I admire greatly these people who have been maligned as conspiracy theorists, you know. The conspiracy is the 9/11 Commission report, you know. And, you know, for people to be trying to find out the right answers to these things, I applaud them. You know, I think they're great. I couldn't encourage them more. And I read as much as I can about it. Now, people say to me, well, come on, Ray, don't you believe that Dick Cheney is capable of something like 9/11? Yeah, I believe that. But as you may recall, I don't do faith-based intelligence, okay? So it doesn't matter what I believe. It's the empirical evidence that I have to go to. Now, I'm not an investigative reporter. Believe it or not, it's a lot easier being an intelligence analyst because you have a little bit more leeway. You can pronounce yourself with lots of probables, and you don't always need two sources. But I work for the best guy on the beat. His name is Robert Perry. He runs consortiumnews.com. He was the guy that not only identified Iran-Contra, but Ali North's role in it. He found out that neither with Newsweek nor with AP could he tell the truth, so he quit. In 1996, he set up his own little website, Consortium News. I am very delighted and very proud to publish there first, okay? Now he says, Ray, this is really baffling because with a crime of this magnitude, almost always you have somebody confiding in his girlfriend in some bar and says, yeah, well, you know, this is the way this went down, this 9/11 thing. You know, I was one of those guys wiring the buildings, and you know, so you know, none of that ever happened. You know, there are lots of people that have theories and so forth. You don't have that kind of evidence that you would expect. So that gives me pause. I don't know what happened to Building 7. It seems almost a certainty to me that it was a controlled demolition, but I don't know how that relates to. So what I say is, look, we need an independent investigation for sure, and we're owed that, especially with these guys, these clowns saying, you know, we were set up to fail. I mean, well, hello, since it's the most important thing that happened in this generation, why don't we do it an independent job? So that's where I come out on this. I don't satisfy anybody by sounding wishy-washy. I'm not wishy-washy. I think the so-called conspiracy theorists are doing us all a very useful service. It's just that I can't say that I know enough or satisfied enough to come down with one of those theories. The question is, how do you get to an independent investigation? I guess the folks that are working on 9/11 theories and so need to do what they're doing. Just try to keep agitating for it, and hopefully there'll be some success before too long. Oh, thank you, Rich.